Abbasid, the Seljuks, you know, even to some degree the Khulafa al-Rashidin, yeah, they may have had a similar millah system, a millet system, but the vast majority of the lands which they controlled were Muslim. Or those regions which they took, whether it be Egypt or the Levant or Persia or Central Asia, they eventually became predominantly Muslim. But the Ottomans had the real challenge of actually keeping together a society which in many parts of its empire was predominantly a majority demographically Christian. And it was a very administratively strong state. I posted a status on Facebook yesterday. The brother Osama said, can you post something which we can share to hype the event up? Yeah? I said, there's no need. But I did. I posted a status, and it was it was a quote from Hussein Yilmaz's book. And Hussein Yilmaz, he described the Ottoman state. And he basically said that if the Abbasids, who were the legitimate seat of the caliphate before the Ottomans, if their legitimacy in the Islamic world was literally based on just some contractual acceptance. Now the Abbasids, without getting into it, you know, they became very weak very quickly. The reason why that is because they promised so many different entities and powers, Persian, Turkic, Sunni, Shia, they promised so much things to different elements who helped them overthrow the Umayyads that they lost a lot of power and influence very quick. However, they justified their legitimacy of being the caliphate based on certain contractual duties. For example, the Abbasids would be the ones who announce when Ramadan is. The Abbasids would be the ones who announce when Eid is. It will be the Abbasids that will give the verbal go-ahead before any military campaign. Most, you know, like just think about it like a court which has many documents, and there's just a kind of print of the Abbasid signature there. But really, you know, the competing and neighboring empires were significantly stronger militarily and economically. And one of the contractual conditions of the Abbasids was that no other competing empire, Muslim, would announce and declare themselves as the caliphate. So Hussein Yilmaz said that if that was the basis, the legitimacy of the Abbasid caliphate, the Ottomans were diametrically the opposite. They were completely different. They were grounded upon the fact that we were sovereign, we are the religious authority, and we are the lawmakers, which is starkly different to the Abbasids. And as a result of having that kind of worldview or ideology with regards to how they shaped their state, they had to be administratively strong. It was a very centralized state. Hussein Yilmaz went as far as to say that the Ottoman state from 1517 to the early 19th century actually reflected and resembled that of the Khilafah of Umar, in the way that it was so centralized, it was so watertight, in the way taxes were collected, zakah was collected, jizya was collected, the way it was redistributed, the way certain budgets from the Baytul Mal was allocated. These things made the Ottomans a very, very strong state administratively. Things changed, of course, as I will mention, I think in the next slide, that as the state was expanding, certain level of autonomy was granted to certain governors, and again, it began corruption and nepotism, which also contributed to the decline. But these were ultimately the characteristics of the state, of the Ottoman state. Achievements. Many achievements, far too many to mention, but just a few that I felt should be mentioned. The Ottomans were one of the first gunpowder empires, along with the Safavids of Persia and the Mughals of India. They were the first gunpowder empires before the Europeans. They had the first muskets, they had the first cannons in their ships, and so forth, which made them an effective fighting force for the best part of 150 years. As I mentioned about the Janissary Corps, they were the first to create a modern elite corps that did not exist anywhere else. Other empires and other states had, specific fighting elements or military elements within their army, but none were ideologically driven and defined as the Janissaries were. And as I also mentioned in the previous state, that the Ottoman Empire really was a cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic and religiously pluralistic state. Forget what Dilly Hussain tells you, forget what the Ottomanist historians may tell you, go and read the accounts of European writers and historians. Those who went and visited Istanbul and other parts of the empire as late as the 1880s and 1890s, who said that we have not seen people of the Abrahamic faith live in such harmony. Was it not the case, I'm just jumping some of the points, that when the Spanish Inquisition took place in Spain after 1492, when the Catholic Castilians basically forced Muslims and Jews to become Christian or they were killed, nowhere else in Europe welcomed the Jewish people. Nowhere else. It was the Ottomans. And they didn't accept them as refugees. No. They welcomed them with open arms to say, come and settle here and flourish. Contribute to the Ottoman state. And they did. And there's Jewish poetry out there which testifies to the treatment in which the Jews had within the Ottoman state for many centuries. It was the Ottomans who, with the permission of Islam, brought Islam to Eastern and Central Europe. There was no Islam in Bosnia, or Kosovo, or Serbia, or Hungary, or Romania, or Bulgaria. Islam had not reached these parts, but it was the permission of Allah that it was through the Ottomans that Islam entered these lands and is still there today. There are still many Muslims in these countries, in these regions, till today. For those of you who have been to Istanbul and have been to the burial place of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, it's known as Ayyub Sultan, you'll see that there's Muslims from the Caucasus, there's Muslims from the Balkans, there's Muslims from all parts of Europe. These people would not have been Muslim if the Ottomans did not bring Islam. It was not like, and it's a point that has to be made, it was not like how when the Europeans entered and colonized many lands in Asia, Middle East and Africa, that they wholeheartedly accepted the missionary work of the Christians and then as soon as they left they abandoned it. No, the Ottomans finished but Islam remained. And you find that in many parts of the Islamic world today. They protected the Mediterranean Sea against pirates. Again, another huge major misconception, a myth, is that pirates were Arabs and Berbers and black Africans. Untrue. The first piracy movements began in Europe. Why? Because the Ottomans had a very strict monitoring system of the Mediterranean Sea, and they did not allow European powers to do as they wish in the Mediterranean. So the Europeans, namely the British and the Spanish and the Portuguese, would commission mercenaries to try sabotage trade routes. It was the Ottomans who protected the Mediterranean for many centuries. As I mentioned earlier as well, many of the Ottoman Khulafa, they allocated from the Waqf, from the religious endowment, a lot of money and resources to the preservation and renovation and infrastructure of the Hijaz and Ash-Sham, Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem. But even for those of you who have been to Mecca, you will find that there is a gate, I believe it's called the Ottoman Gate, an entrance. There's certain work that's been done to the Kaaba, which was done by the Ottoman rulers, as with Masjid al-Nabawi, as with Masjid al-Aqsa. There's Ottoman work that's carried out, that still remains in Cairo, in Syria, in Jordan. Another funny one is that under Khalifa Abdullah Hamid, he also commissioned the creation of the first robot. A bit random, I know. There it is, that's an official Ottoman newspaper. He commissioned Japan to start building the first robot. It never happened. But who knows, maybe Japan's fixation with robots and AI and all that stuff may have been inspired by the Ottomans. Allah, I don't know. And it was another policy of Khalifa Abdullah Hamid to have built a train line which went from Istanbul to Cairo, to Damascus, to Jerusalem, to Mecca, to Medina. And this was part of Abdul Hamid's pan-Islamic worldview, that he wanted to connect all these key Islamic cities that had a lot of history in them, that meant a lot to the Muslims, to build this train line to reconnect the key parts of the Ottoman state and make it easier to travel, to go pilgrimage, to do trade. Sadly, that project never materialized. Naturally, any state or empire or polity which span across 3 continents would have had to have a number of relations with competing and neighboring empires. The Ottoman state, at its zenith and at its pinnacle, even towards the decline, it was still covered Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. As a result of that, the Ottomans for centuries had different relationships with different competing empires of its time. So just to quickly speed through it, the Byzantines, or the Eastern Holy Roman Empire, the relationship with them was always hostile. Again, for those of you watching the English Ertugrul, this beef dates back to Ertugrul Ghazi. And so the relationship with the Byzantines was always hostile. And it's ultimately the Ottomans that delivered the final blow which ended the Byzantine Empire. France, surprisingly, was the traditional European ally of the Ottomans for at least 200 years. The Austrian Habsburg Empire, the relationship with them was also very hostile. There were 2 famous sieges of Vienna, where under Suleiman I, literally they had besieged Vienna, and had Vienna fell, the Ottomans would have entered Western Europe, but it didn't. And also the Austrian Habsburg Empire led a lot of the campaigns against the Ottomans because Hungary fell to the Ottomans under Khalif Suleiman I. So the relationship with the Austrian Habsburg was very hostile until World War I, where the Ottomans sided with the Germans, and by extension, they were allies of the Austrians. Russia was regarded as the arch enemy for 150 years. They would make major incursions towards the Balkans, and it is also believed that it was the Russian Empire who inspired a lot of the nationalist fervor in the Balkan area, because the Russians were Greek Orthodox. Many of the Balkan countries that were formerly Christian, they were mainly Greek Orthodox as well as Catholic. And in the late 19th century and early 20th century, the Russians played a key role, along with Britain and France, in inspiring separatist agitations within the Ottoman state. Germany was relatively a new state. Right? When Otto von Bismarck unified the state, I believe it was in the 1860s or 1870s, don't quote me. So Germany was a relatively new state. But they were the final allies of the Ottomans in World War I. But it was Britain and France who were the annihilators. They were the ones who, as a result of World War I, and as a result of their own geopolitical interests in the regions of North Africa and the Middle East, were the ones who essentially defeated the Ottoman Empire, namely through inspiring and leading and supporting what was known as the Arab Revolt. But the Ottomans also had relationship with Muslim powers, with the Safavids, who were theologically 12 Shias. The relationship with them was hostile, because the Safavids would always attack the Ottomans' eastern flank when they were on European campaigns. And that was something that was always went to and fro, that whenever the Ottomans were on a European campaign, rest assured the Safavids would probably attack Iraq or Armenia or Azerbaijan or somewhere like that. So the relationship with them was hostile for political reasons, for religious reasons, for sectarian reasons. The Mamluks, also a hostile relationship. The Mamluks, let's not forget, they were too a very noble and prominent Muslim dynasty. It was the Mamluks who defeated the Mongols in the Battle of Ain Jalut. It was the Mamluks who fought the Mongols. It was the Mamluks who preserved the seat of the Abbasid Khilafah. Though the Abbasids held very little power, it was they who felt the religious importance to preserve that dynasty. But they had very hostile relationship with the Ottomans, and eventually they were defeated. However, a number of very influential Mamluk tribal leaders still existed within Egypt, but they were sadly exterminated by an individual called Muhammad Ali Pasha, who was a kind of semi-autonomous governor of Egypt. He rounded all the remaining Mamluk elders in Cairo and he killed them. This was in the 1900s and the 19th century. Last but not least, the Mughals. For those of you who are from modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, the Ottomans had a very warm relation with the Mughals. In fact, there are documents in, I believe it's in a number of museums in Pakistan, but it's been documented that when the Mughal emperors used to write to the Ottomans, they used to refer to them as Amir al-Mu'mineen, as the Khulafa of the Ummah. They used to write in their letters. This is stored in the Turkish historical archives. In fact, there's a specific letter from a Mughal emperor called Babur and Humayun, where they wrote to Khalif Suleiman I and other Ottoman rulers. I think it was Khalif Suleiman I and Murad IV. And in these letters, which are preserved today, they refer to the Ottoman rulers as Amir al-Mu'mineen, as the blessed Khulafa of the Ummah. It has also been documented that it was a very common practice in key cities within the Mughal Empire that every Jum'ah, as part of the khutbah, after praising the beloved Prophet, ﷺ, his family, his companions, they would also send salutations to the Ottoman rulers. It's documented. So their relationship was warm with the Mughals generally. But there was also a theological an affinity with the Mughals. Why? Both states were Hanafi, both states were generally very Sufi, and they followed either the Ash'ari or Maturidi school of creed. So there's a lot of similarities in that regard. There were little periods of disagreements. For example, when the Ottomans required the Mughals to militarily act to counter the British and the Portuguese, sometimes the Mughals were unable to do so. And likewise, when the Mughals required the Ottomans to militarily act to counter the Safavids, sometimes the Ottomans were unable to do so. So that created tensions during some period. But generally, Ottoman and Mughal relations were warm, and the Mughals went as far as to ceremoniously, at least, acknowledge the Islamic authority of the Ottomans. Reasons for decline. There's many reasons for decline, right? And it would be incorrect to identify one reason. It never really is one reason. There's usually a plethora of reasons which contribute towards decline. And the following are some of them. I have my personal views with regards to which were key reasons, but the following all played a role. Excessive autonomy and corruption. Now, when I said to you that the Ottomans grounded themselves in having a very centralized and tight-knit state, in order for taxes and levies to be collected properly, they had to grant governors a certain level of power and autonomy. Now, for those of you who have read a bit about the life of Umar radiallahu anhu, one of his sunnah was that he would regularly change governors. He didn't allow governors to stay in power for too long in case of corruption, in case that this governor will start building relations with the indigenous people, and therefore this will create nepotism and corruption. Umar ibn Khattab made sure that he changed governors very regularly. The Ottomans, once they realized that certain governors were doing a good job in collecting levies, in collecting taxes and redistributing it, that sadly began nepotism and corruption, and too much autonomy nearly always is a problem for any traditional empire or state of that time. There was an intellectual stagnation. The fact that a number of Ottoman ulama, they kind of closed the gates of ijtihad. That they felt that the laws and that they had codified and the canons that they had created, that it was sufficient until the end of times. And this was very problematic. It was very problematic because when it came to a case of advancing technologically, when it came to things which had new realities which had to be studied, that generally speaking, the Ottoman scholars or the leading scholars in the religious establishment generally had abandoned ijtihad in dealing with new realities. At a time when Europe at least was moving at a rapid pace with the Industrial Revolution in terms of armament and weaponry, the printing press and so forth, the Ottomans in this regard and the ulama who made a lot of these just felt that, you know what we've got in hand is enough for us to last until the end of times. And that was a big problem. Also, and what was indicative of this problem was the fact that when that time came, the early to mid 19th century, that is why you had elements of the Ottoman ruling elite seeking answers and solutions for their own state from Europe. So it can be argued to some degree in the defense of those who are regarded today as secularists and reformists and sellouts. They felt that there was not a robust approach internally to deal with new realities. So therefore we have to seek answers and solutions from another civilization or state which appeared to be moving with the times. A decrease in military campaigns. Remember that period I spoke about, 1740 to 1768, that 28 years of peace, that time where the Ottomans basically went into neutral, put their feet up, kicked back and started relaxing from the spoils of war. That period was a huge contributor to military decline. And I want to quote two very well-known Ottomanist historians. I highly recommend for you guys to get their book if you're interested in Ottoman history. Dr. Virginia Aksan, in her book Ottoman Wars, 1700 to 1860, An Empire Besieged, page 130, she said, "The Ottoman Empire continued to maintain a flexible and strong economy, society, and military throughout the 17th and much of the 18th century. However, during a long period of peace from 1740 to 1768, the Ottoman military system fell behind that of their European rivals." And her colleague, Dr. Suraya Faruqi, who studied in Durham University, in her book, she echoed the same sentiment. She said, "Moreover, in the 18th century, when expansion definitely had ended, Ottoman military effectiveness and sultanic concern for army reform were not totally at an end." So while she acknowledged that military expansion certainly came to an end, there was still a level of importance that was given to the military army. Hence why a number of reforms under the Tanzimat sought solutions from the Europeans. Nationalism. Nationalism was a massive blow, massive contributor to the decline of the Ottoman state. Because nationalism essentially was a European idea. It was an idea which was born out of the post-Enlightenment. It was born out of the Christian Reformation. It was born out of the Treaty of Westphalia. And it was nationalism which essentially was used in the Balkans by Russia. It was nationalism which was used by the British in the Arabian Peninsula. And it was nationalism which was a strong part of the Young Turks movement. For those of you who have